Hi there and welcome. Steve Wills here. Thanks for joining me. This is now the 5th video in our ongoing tutorial regarding process automation. We'll be pushing the envelope a bit here today with some more complex topics, which I'll enumerate for you here on the screen. I threw in a few admin tools at the end because we had a little time left over. So the first one we'll be looking at, time subroutines. As you can guess, they're executed based on time. So we'll send a document into the process just to show you that these fields are initialized at 0. We'll be updating them. So this is our time simulation capability in Workflow Ascendant. So we've advanced into the alert period. You can see here the fields have been updated. So how did we do that? Going into the time trigger documents, we looked at these in detail last week, but just to recap, this is where the time trigger is activated. It is deactivated when it moves outside of any state because none are specified there. As you can see, it's set off after 3 days in the activated period, and these are the routines that are executed. So to review again, looking at code abstraction, we simply make the connection here between the reference in the state document and the actual routine calls. And these, of course, are very rudimentary routines. And just as a reminder, we're always trying to put a maximum amount of functionality into the hands of Power Business users. So rather than put the routines there, a more logical place to put them, a more useful place, would be in the Actions tab. Moving on now to state subroutines. This is where we execute back-end routines based on a transparent state change. I'll explain what that is in a minute. So again, as user A1, you can see those fields are set to 0. Now we'll select the option Run Agent. So you can see the intervention log was updated, as were the fields. So how do we do this? So going into the state documents once again, this is the state from which we selected Run Agent. And notice that we're routing directly back to the calling state immediately. So the document is a pass-through. Those routines are executed. And note that we do not update the history log here. State stack. This is where we combine in a single process states that need to be accessed in a variable order. So this capability allows you to essentially have multiple workflows without having to define multiple workflows, which of course makes maintainability, costs, all that much more reasonable. So again, I put the graphic up here on the upper right hand portion of the screen to follow along what's happening in the application. Now we'll go through state stack 2. This time I won't update the graphic. I hope the idea is clear enough. So now we've been through the 2 orders of this workflow. We'll take a look at them now in the historical log. So here they are side by side. You can compare the 2. And so how do we do that? We'll start in the initial state where the stacks are initialized, depending on which user starts it. It's a virtual state, so the document is routed immediately, and that according to step. And so here is where the stack is actually managed. User stack, similar principle, except here, of course, we're popping off usernames off the stack as opposed to state names. Now, this is extremely powerful as it essentially allows you to have a generic approval circuit, and you can copy and paste these particular documents, state documents, from process to process. So again, the graphic up on the upper right-hand corner will follow along what's happening in the application. And then on to director. So let's take a look at the definitions. In the initial state, this is where we bring the user names into the notes document. So that will be our stack. When the document is advanced, it's routed immediately, and where it goes depends on whether or not the stack is empty. And here is where the stack is managed. It's also managed in another state, that's in the validation. And this could be written much more simply in Lotus script. Perhaps it should be. But again, this code never changes. So as nasty as it looks, you can actually use this, copy, paste them as you so see fit. Okay, just to look at some quick admin tools. Sometimes alerts just aren't enough. We need to remind users to intervene in particular workflow documents. So we'll repeat the previous workflow in our particular scenario of reminding a user to intervene. So rapidly advancing the document. Now let's say, for example, that user D1, for whatever reason, does not intervene in a reasonable amount of time. The administrator can come in and simply send a reminder, as easy as that. And this, of course, is the default email that's described, that is defined in the parameter document, which we saw in our first video. And so here D1 can intervene, and all is good. Sometimes we need to force a state change in a document. End users inevitably make mistakes in routing documents, and the most frequent one is when a user prematurely archives a document. And so we'll follow that example. This is follow on from the previous example. And so we'll say here that Director Red neglected to put in some essential comments. So the administrator can come in here and route the document back to Director, and he'll add some comments to indicate why this document was redirected. So now, the workflow document has been routed back to Director Red. As you can see, the historical log has been updated accordingly. Very important, of course, for audit purposes. Now Red can come in, add the particular comments in question, and send the document off. So just to recap, always I'd like to emphasize this is a complete and consistent methodology, and this is what renders all of this functionality possible. So we looked at time and state subroutines, we looked at state and user stacks, and lastly we looked at a few administrative tools. Well, that's all for this video. I hope you found it to be helpful and informative. I hope you join us next week as we move on in our automating processes. Thanks for joining me.